Alright, Happy New Year, and welcome to the Windows Phone Lightning Design Reviews. Today we're going to take a look at a couple of apps and talk about how their design might be tweaked and improved to better take advantage of some of the Windows Phone design language and also just some general usability and design tips. So let's get started. The first app we're going to look at is called B-Link. I think that's how you say it, instead of Blink, B-Link. And the idea behind this app is that it's kind of a social network type of tool, but what it's good at is connecting friends who want to exchange something, like let's say books, or maybe share something like a house or a carpool or something like that. So the first screen that we're going to look at is the login screen, and you can see that a lot of those Windows Phone design language themes are being followed. It's very clean, very simple. You can see the button input styles are very familiar. This developer has taken some liberty with the colors and applied kind of a blue theme to everything. Just sort of, you might have a brand color for your particular app. So that's fine. I would just, a couple of words of warning. I would say that you want to make sure, even if you're using a theme color for your app, that you're still taking advantage of the user's theme color for their phone, the light and the dark theme. It's kind of weird if your whole phone is taking on a particular theme and then you jump into an application and it just does whatever it wants. So you can have your own stylistic bend on the app. Just make sure that for this app there is a dark theme alternative. Also be careful if your brand theme is blue, for example. Here you can see the text is blue, but also the hyperlink, forget your password, that's also blue. And blue text on screens and computers is usually, that's a design pattern for a clickable piece of text, a hyperlink. So that can be a little bit confusing. The more things in common just your normal text labels have with a hyperlink, the harder it becomes to distinguish what's clickable and what's not. Here you can see the hyperlink is still underlined, so that's a bit of an indicator. But it just kind of muddies things a little bit when you start using the same colors for interactive elements and non-interactive elements. On the bottom of this page you can see there's a sign-in button, and it's aligned left, and a lot of the controls by default, and these text boxes up above, you can see they're full width, they're horizontally stretched. And I would recommend that you do that with as many controls as you can, including the sign-in button on the bottom, make it stretch all the way across. And one of the reasons for doing that is that people can be using their phones in their left hand or their right hand, or they might have only one hand. They might not be holding with one hand and pressing the buttons with the other, but they might be able just manipulating everything on the phone with their thumb. And so you want to make sure for all these different scenarios that those controls are as accessible as possible to the reach of your thumb. And when you make a control smaller or you put it off to the side, it might be a little bit difficult for someone just with one hand to reach it. If it's all the way across, you're just providing a larger hit area. So that's it for the login screen. The next screen we're looking at is the notification screen, and so this is where if you have a post that you've put out there for a car ride that you want to split with someone, or trading a book or something, these are where people would comment on those posts that you put out there. I think that's the only type of notification that I see here, is just commenting on particular shares and exchanges. So a couple things about this screen. I would consider, for all of these interior screens, the logo area you have up top, that B-Link banner at the top, that you shrink that down. I think it's appropriate to have it be somewhat large and prominent on the login page, just because that's the first experience that users get with the application. And it's good to know what you're logging into. But by this point, they've logged in, they know what app they're using, so you could shrink that logo down so it's taking up less space. And it's not just about screen real estate, it's also about identifying what screen you're on. So once you shrink that logo down, the largest thing on the screen is going to be the title, notification. And that's great because it identifies what page you're on. You just at a glance, if you take your your phone out and just return to this app, you're going to know what page you're on. If you have a larger element that's more dominant, then it just kind of gets lost a little bit. So looking down at the content underneath all of that, the actual comments by each one of your friends here, I wonder if these could be a little bit more informative. Each one of them is saying that there's a comment. It'd be really great if I could see the comment right there, or at least the first line of it, the first few words of it. Especially when you're doing one of these at-a-glance type of screens, it's almost like a dashboard, these panorama and pivot screens where you just want to be able to just swipe around and see, show me the top 5 things that are going on. Not having to click or tap in to each one of these to find out what the content is really useful. So that would probably involve rearranging the repeated region you have here a little bit differently. Maybe you just include the name and the topic and the timestamp, and maybe they're a little bit smaller. But really, the thing that you want to get at is that comment. So I would, if it's possible, to include that, I would. Looking down at the app bar, this is a pretty good app bar. It's taking advantage of some built-in icons in the Seago symbol set. It's using just the traditional symbol buttons, search, refresh. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel on those icons. Those ones work great. I would consider for the envelope icon that you use a plus sign instead. If it is what I think it is, that's the button that you press to create a new post. And I would consider making that a plus icon. The envelope might be confused with checking your messages or sending a private message to someone or something like that. But a plus icon is well recognized as creating something new. So that's it for this page. Diving into the next screen in this pivot view, the news screen, this is where the actual posts are, where your friends are saying that they want to share a car ride or exchange a book. And I would say both on this screen and the previous one, there's a lot of text that's in each one of these posts, and if you could add a little bit more space in between each one of them, I think it would be easier to read. There's a tendency for developers to want to reduce the space between elements and try and fit as much as they can on the screen, but you'll find that panning around and scrolling with your finger is very easy. So what you want to focus on is the content that you're showing, making that very readable. And when things are kind of sandwiched together, they're very, very closely spaced together, it gets harder to tell where one item ends and the next begins. The photos help here. Kind of shows you where each item begins, but just a little bit of space in between those groups, I think, would help. I would consider, if you look at some of the content in each one of these posts, you can see there are, so look at the first one, that's a share. She wants to share a car ride. The next one is an exchange. She wants to exchange books. If it's possible, I think it would be really neat if you could represent a share or an exchange with an icon. And also the type. If you have some common user cases like a car ride or trading books, a little icon of a book or a little icon of a car could help you really, if you have a lot of friends and you have a lot of posts, it could help you really quickly identify something that you're looking for as you pan down this page. And I talk about this every week, but I'm going to bring it up now, and that is the Windows Phone grid. This is something that isn't talked about a lot, but there are a couple of really good blog posts out there about this, and there's some good resources. You want to make everything on your application design aligned to this grid. And the link that you see right now is a direct link to a transparent PNG. I'll jump over to it so you can see it. So this is transparent PNG. It's the size of the Windows Phone screen, and you can layer this over your comps. If you're working in Photoshop or graphics editing program, you can layer it over there to make sure that your design lines up. It also comes in the templates for pages in Windows Phone applications. You'll see it on the bottom. It's commented out in the XAML. So you can actually uncomment that, and then you'll see it in your app as your app is running, even if you're running, in debug mode or on the emulator or whatnot. You just temporarily display it while you're working on the application design. And it's really just going to make all of your designs look really crisp, and it just will do a lot for you that just seems a little bit like magic. If I can get back over to my presentation here. And one example of this is something it's the first thing I notice on any one of these apps, if they don't conform to the grid, is the left margin. I'm sure you've noticed everything in Windows Phone apps is aligned left. And it also, if you look at the templates, that margin is already set up for you. You can see this pivot control already has the N in news is already lined up to that left margin. But some of the things that this developer's added in, like the logo and some of the content down below, is not aligned. I can't tell if it's not aligned left or just doesn't have the right margin on it. But it's noticeable when you just look straight down the page. It almost feels a little jagged. Some elements are further out than others. But if you just simply align everything to that same vertical line, your whole app is just going to look a lot more crisp. Just to mention a little bit of why that is, and why that's a good design pattern. In graphic design, there's a concept called eye flow and rhythm, and it basically says that when things are lined up, your eye can very quickly just scan down them in a straight line. But when your eye has to kind of zigzag around and hunt for things, then it just feels uncomfortable. So it's just a really minor detail, but that grid is really helpful if you don't just naturally have an eye for those things, especially if you just kind of snap them into that grid. So the next pane in this pivot view is the Me page. And this is just pretty much your own profile, showing some numbers on how many posts you've had and whatnot, some information about yourself, your username and picture. I wondered if this needed to be in the pivot view, or it could be like in the extended app bar. The app bar down there, you can expand it and include more text links underneath, and that's a great place for putting maybe like an about page about your application, where it's not something the user needs all the time, but it's there if they need it. And I would wonder if the Me page could go down there. It depends on the use case. If this is a page that I'm constantly looking at and I'm checking my status and I'm really proud of it or something like that, it might be something you want to keep in the pivot. But if it's just something that is there to be informative or to edit your profile, it's more of like a settings type of scenario, I would consider putting it down in the app bar. The next page we're going to look at is posting a status, and so this form has a few different design patterns going on. If we look at, we'll just look at these fields one at a time. If you look at the first field, there's a label that says category, and then there's it's probably a list picker where you tap it and then you get a list of options like exchange and share. Maybe there are some others. The second field, there's not an external label. The label is inside the field as a watermark or a placeholder. And there's a little hint down below, just an example of what you could put in there, books or comics. And then the other fields kind of follow that similar pattern. So this is a little bit confusing because on the first one, the label is outside the field, and then we switch to a different design pattern where the label is inside the field. And so I would use these. You've got the placeholder, you've got the label, you've got the field itself. I would use them like this. Label goes outside the field like it does in the first one, category. And then inside the field, if you want, you can include as a placeholder those examples. So kind, you'd see kind as the label outside the field. Then inside that, as that watermarked placeholder, you'd see books, comics. And there's a few reasons for following that design pattern. One of them is once I type into these fields, if the only label, the only indicator of what the field is inside of it, and I'm just kind of overwriting that, now the label's not there anymore. So if you have a very short form like this, it's not a huge problem. but it's just a little bit confusing if you end up looking at a form you've filled out and there's no labels for anything. So I would just consider switching up how those are presented to be a little bit more consistent. The last thing I want to say about this app is just live tiles. This developer may be working on a live tile for their app. I'm not really sure. But I would recommend doing one for this app in particular because there's a lot of updates coming from your friends, and that would be a great thing to put on the tile. Comments that people are making or new posts that pop up or saying, hey, you've got 3 new shares available or something like that. So this is a link where you can go and find out what live tile templates are available. You've got the different sizes of tiles, and you've got the different content that you can post up to those as notifications, images and text and whatnot. So the next app we're going to look at is called TipTip, and the idea behind this app is that you can calculate a tip for a bill in a restaurant or whatnot, but the little novelty behind it is that it's musical. All of the buttons that you press to enter in numbers are they have like a piano sound to them, or a little snare or a little hi-hat, and the way that the app actually looks like a little piano keyboard. And the first thing that I want to talk about with this app is the icon that they have, which I thought was pretty clever. You know, icons for your apps, they don't have to be masterpieces, but this one does a good job of really showing what the app is all about. It's about food, money, and music. It's just kind of, the icon itself kind of summarizes all of that. And it does it really clear, and it's memorable too. I mean, it's probably the only tip app that's in the shape of a piano, so it's something that users will remember. So the main page for this app, there's a lot going on here, but you can see that it basically looks like a little piano keyboard, and there's a lot of different settings you can choose. How much you want to tip, if you're splitting the check multiple ways, if the number you're entering in includes tax or if it doesn't. I want to say a couple like general things about this screen, and then we're going to come back to it at the end. The first thing I want to say is this app is doing some things that kind of seem to incorporate the Windows Phone design style. We've got the app bar along the bottom. We're using the Seago type ramp, just the font that's being used in all the text. But at the same time, it has its own kind of design. There's this kind of cloudy background which matches the user's accent theme color. And there's also this piano off to the side with these keys that are clearly illustrated. It's clearly not real, but at the same time they have some depth to them. There's shadows and gradients and things that aren't really part of the Windows Phone design language. So I would recommend, just in general for this developer, I would choose kind of which direction do you want to go in. And I think this is totally up to you. Do you want to really try to adhere to the Windows Phone design language, or do you want to go in this hyper-realistic route where it really feels like a real piano? And you can imagine how going more towards the Windows Phone design language route, you'd be kind of taking some of these shadows off and making everything flat and vectorized and illustrated. But if you went in the hyper-realistic route, you might choose to use an actual photo of a real piano keyboard and really make it hyper-realistic, make it so when you press the buttons, the keys, they actually look like they're being pressed in. So, I mean, that would be more graphical work, but I think it's just a matter of which direction you want to go into. Other really minor thing about this app, before I move on to talk about controls specifically, is the backspace key. We downloaded it here around the office, and people weren't really sure what that key did. And I would recommend, there's a backspace icon in the keyboard if you open up the keyboard on your phone, and it looks like a little sideways house, like a little 5-sided shape with an X in it, and that's the backspace key that users are accustomed to using on the keyboard to actually get backspace characters. So I would consider using that. You might have to illustrate it yourself. I'm not sure if it's available in the Seago icon set or anything. But I would recommend using the actual backspace icon instead of the two less than brackets. Also, you can see that the developer shrank the app bar over on the left, so it doesn't actually span 100% of the screen. They probably did that so they'd have more room for the keys on the right side, but it looks a little weird. You know, every app that the user has on their phone, that app bar has icons that are centered in the screen that are easily accessible from your thumb, whether you're right-handed or left-handed, and this one doesn't. So I think that's just a little weird kind of inconsistency. If you're worried about screen real estate, you can always minimize the app bar. That's just something you can do, which will shrink it down to it's probably only 20% of the height that it has there. And that's not always a great solution for your app if you need those buttons to always be available. But on this one, there's just a settings. That's the only app button that we have down there on the app bar. So I would recommend minimizing that app bar and stretching it all the way across. So we'll come back to the screen in a second. I want to talk a little bit about controls. So there's you can make your own controls. There are ones that are built into the framework. There's design guidelines on those right here. It's the first link, and those design guidelines are good because they give you some documentation on how to implement them, but they also give you use cases, scenarios. So even if you're just designing in Photoshop, or you're just thinking, I've got the user has to make a choice between two options. What should I use for that? What type of control should I use? Should it be a checkbox or radio or what? Those design guidelines will help you decide. The Windows Phone Toolkit contains some more controls that aren't built in. Things like, if I can remember, I think toggle switch and list picker are in there. Once you start using the toolkit, you'll really come to depend on having all those controls are available to you. So make sure you check those out. And then Telerik makes some controls specifically for Windows Phone. And I'm not always sure about Telerik's controls because sometimes they seem to be more robust than you really need. You know, sometimes they're a sledgehammer when all you need is a screwdriver. But they do a numeric up-down, which to this developer I would recommend you check it out. It's got much more of the feeling of the Windows Phone controls. And one of the interesting things that they do is they include the plus and the minus for the number off to the right side of the control, and they're right next to each other. So it's very easy for you to quickly just up, down, down, plus, minus on that control without moving your thumb very much. You don't have to move it, halfway across the screen to manipulate the number. So I recommend you check that out. So if we look at the settings screen, there's some clearer scenarios where some of these controls and guidelines could be used. So just taking a look at some of these really quickly. We've got tip so first, an overall comment. It's kind of difficult to see where one group of options ends and the other begins. If you remember when I was talking about B-Link, I recommended that the developer put more space in between the groups of options, so you could tell the items that are close together, grouped together, are associated, and then wherever there's a space, you know that that's a break and that there's something new down, separate from that. So I would make the same comment about this screen. I mean, if you look between some of these labels like tax rate, tip preference, and then the options themselves like don't tip, tip also, the space between them is not very consistent, and it doesn't help me to just visually identify a group in terms of a label with options and how that's separate from other things. The indenting helps, but only a little bit. I'm still kind of jumbled up I haven't looked at this before, so it's just kind of speaking as a new user, I would be confused. But looking specifically at tip preference, we have don't tip on the tax portion or do tip on the tax portion. So that's I call that a binary choice. You just have two options and you choose one. And so those types of options where there's only two, so usually just yes or no, on or off, you can usually represent those with a checkbox or a toggle switch. Toggle switches are useful if you have custom labels that you want to use, but usually you don't need this much space and multiple things to click on when there's really just one choice to be made. Underneath that there is round up to the nearest, and then the way this works is you choose from one of these coins, you tap on one of these coins, and then it becomes underlined, and that's the indicator that that is the selection. So a few things about this. It's kind of cute, it's kind of fun, but it's certainly an untraditional control on Windows Phone. So it's a trade-off for you. Do you think it's worth it for adding this little bit of personality right here? I don't really know. I think you have enough personality with the main screen playing music. I don't think the coins are really necessary. Also, there's just some legibility issues, like the labeling on the gray coins. It's pretty hard to read. The gray text on the gray background. The cent and the dollar are not as big of an issue. But then again, I'm not even sure if as a user the $1 golden coin would make a lot of sense to me. I don't think I've ever seen a coin like that as an American. So you can use, there are controls you can use for selecting from a list, like a list picker, that I would recommend using. It doesn't mean that you don't have to throw out icons altogether. You can still use icons. But just when something custom like this is the only way that the user can interact with a control, I would just opt for for introducing as least confusion as possible. And so the last control on here is the round the tip or round the amount to pay. So this is another binary option. How do you want to round? By the tip, just by the tip alone, or by the entire amount? So this is a scenario where a checkbox wouldn't really do the trick, because there's actually two very explicit options. They're mutually exclusive, but it's not just a yes/no on/off scenario. It's actually two different ways of doing something. But I think a toggle switch could work there just as well. So just I mocked up some of these ideas so we can just see them in action. So tipping on the tax portion, I've changed that into a toggle switch. I think this could also be a checkbox, but I wanted to show toggle switches in two states here. So the way these work is you put the label on the control that describes the on state. This is the way you label a checkbox as well. You describe what it's going to do when this selection is on or checked. And then what you can do with toggle switches is you can supply the labeling to display when the switch is on and when it's off. So for a lot of toggle switches, just saying on/off, it works quite well, and that works well for this first option. The second one, for how much or how we want to round, that's a little bit more explicit. We need to describe the two states. So you could have a toggle switch that when it's off, it says the amount to pay, and when it's on, flipped over to the right, it's the entire amount. And you just supply the label for it in both states, and you can do that in the control itself, right in the XAML. The second, or the last option, is the selection of how much you want to round by 25 cents or 50 cents or $1, but just displaying it as a list picker. Again, it's not as fancy as what you had, but it's much clearer. I think very easy to read, and it's easy to understand what the current selection is, 25 cents. There's just no confusion there. I think for a settings screen, you want it to be as clear as possible. People just want to get in here, make their selections, and get out. There's not a whole lot of entertainment value in it. So going back to the main page, you can see how some of those, maybe the numeric picker we could apply to the top there to have more of a Windows Phone design language feel. And then also inside of the value there's a before tax, and if I was to tap that, it would change to say after tax. That's actually a toggle. And that wasn't clear to me when I first saw it. I just saw before tax. Okay, I'm not really sure why before is green. That's not really a design pattern that I've seen before on my phone. So we weren't even sure that was clickable or tappable. So I think that you might want to consider changing that to a toggle as well. And really, the last things that I'm going to say about this the screen are just, I'm just going to give the developer a bunch of questions to ask. One of those is the use of the accent color as the background for the entire interface. I'm not really sure that that's the best use of an accent color. You can tell that what happened here was the designer used that. So I've selected blue. Blue is my background color. Now he wants to draw attention to certain things, like the tip plus 37 cents or the before flag on the tax, and he has to choose a new color, and he's chosen green, which is not really, that's typically what we would use the accent color for, things that we want to draw attention to. And our background would typically be white or black. So, not quite following the design patterns that are established is forcing you to make some design decisions that are kind of questionable and new, and I'm not sure that users are really going to get it. So yeah, we talked about controls, talked about color a little bit. Looking at the text, the developers added a gradient to some of these controls and some of these pieces of text, and I'm not really sure if that really adds anything. You can see in some areas, like right in the middle where it says tax, it actually kind of makes it a little harder to read. It's starting to get muddied in with that background texture. It's almost the same color towards the bottom of the gradient. So I'm not really sure that really adds anything. And I would just, whenever you're deviating from the established design patterns, make sure that it's for a good reason. And certainly that it's not making things less legible. Yeah, so I would recommend to this developer. I mean, it's got good reviews. People like it. They think it's fun. I would just recommend that you decide, between that traditional Windows Phone design language look and feel, or just go in your own direction and kind of really tailor it to that hyper-realistic look that you seem to start to be going for here. Yeah, so that's it for today. The next session is going to be on January 10th. You can submit your app before next Tuesday to get on the list. You can find this video and past lightning reviews on our registration page. And so thank you very much.